What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Wildcat Dash here on Dash Sports TV. My name is Jacob Mennuti. I'm joined again with our co-host Ryan Wall. Ryan, how are we doing on this Friday afternoon?
I'm very excited because Pac-12 football is back.
Yeah, I never thought that these words would be coming out of my mouth anytime soon, but the Pac-12 football is back. The conference presidents voted unanimously yesterday to begin the 2020 football season starting on November 6th. It'll be a 7-game season that'll be played over the span of 7 weeks, which doesn't leave any sort of wiggle room for any sort of rescheduling the games of any kind right before the final college football playoff committee meeting. They will also be doing similar to what the Big Ten is doing, where that final game will be one of those cross division games where the top seeds from each division will play against each other, followed by the 2 seeds playing against each other, the 3 seeds, and so on. So, despite all of the news that was released yesterday, there was still a bunch of stuff that kind of left us scratching our head. Ryan, I want to start with you on this one. What stood out to you in yesterday's webinar, and what questions do you still have surrounding the Pac-12 football season?
Something you started off with, they fit the 7 games into 7 weeks, and I just find that crazy that that's all going to play out perfectly for them, because as we've seen in other conferences, teams around college football have been postponing their games, moving them back, but it's been working for them because they have more wiggle room. But with the Pac-12, like, what happens if two teams miss their games? Like, what are they going to do? Because there's no time to fit them in because the season ends right before the college football playoffs and bowl season starts.
Yeah, 100%. I think another big thing that we kind of was wondering about is that we didn't have a schedule yet, right? I would have thought that an official schedule would have been coming out yesterday. I would have thought that the conversations of bringing football back and the schedules would have gone hand to hand, but they did say in yesterday's webinar that it was going to be released sometime this week or in the next couple of days at least. So at least we have that to cling on to. I was also really, I had to laugh. I was also really surprised to see that the Pac-12 came out and said that this whole thing wasn't about the money. I mean, like, come on, you don't lie to us like that, right? Like, we know a huge reason why the Pac-12 is doing this whole thing is because of their TV deals, right? I mean, it was so funny. They went totally out of their way to say that they weren't doing this for the money. Like, before any of the media had any chance to ask any questions, they like made it an apparent thing that they had to say that we're not doing this for the money. So like, there's just no reason to lie to us like that. I
Yeah.
mean, another thing is just like, because like the myocarditis, like that, there was something that they didn't talk about at all yesterday. They had one question about it and they completely ducked it. I mean, so the reality is that the big thing that was driving this whole thing was the TV deals and it was the money. Because like 3 weeks ago, Larry Scott said that they weren't going to play until January, right? And now here we are going to be playing football in November. So like, what really changed in the last couple weeks? Like, sure, you got those Quidel tests coming in this week, but like, realistically, what really changed? Like, it was the pressure from the other conferences, and it was those mega TV deals. Like, would you agree?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It's teams and players putting pressure on Larry Scott and others to make something happen because they're just getting frustrated at this point. Something else that I saw in the reports yesterday at the conference was they announced that no fans will be allowed in any of the Pac-12 stadiums throughout the entire season, which I just found pretty crazy because the season doesn't start for another 6 weeks and then 7 week season. Like, we don't even know where the world will be in like 3 months, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I think we were just joking about it on the pre-show that like we're not surprised about anything anymore with the Pac-12 making decisions, but you would have assumed that like why make that decision right now, right? Like the season is not for another 6 weeks. Like you just said, we have no idea what the situation is going to be in 6 weeks. I know some of the NFL teams and some of the college football teams have had their fans come into the stadium, so it's so hard to really just make that choice right now and just say, hey, we're not doing anything, no fans, no nothing. Like, I definitely think that decision was certainly rushed. And I want to circle back to what you were talking about earlier about the 7 games in 7 weeks. I mean, like the schedule being like that just leaves zero room for error, right? Like we talked about it, how that final seventh game is going to be, I think, a few days before that final college football meeting where they pick, they choose the 4 teams or whatever. So like if a team has to cancel one of its games in the Pac-12, like what's going to happen, right? Like they didn't talk about that at all, right? Like it's already bad enough that these Pac-12 teams are playing 7 games, but now if they have to cancel a game and they end up playing, 5 or 6, like there's no chance that they're going to be in the college football playoffs. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, and we'll go more into detail. But I mean, I think that the possibility of a game being canceled is very much, a real possibility, right? Like we've already seen it in some of the other conferences, right? Like Houston, I think, had their 4th game canceled on them this season because of the pandemic. Virginia Tech hasn't even played a game yet this season because teams are canceling on them. I know Colorado is having some issues practicing right now. I think they can't practice for another 2 weeks. So it's definitely a little concerning to not hear about any sort of backup plan about if something bad were to go down. But at the end of the day, I mean, I do understand you had to cram these games in, right? Like there was really no room to kind of start the season earlier or later, in my opinion. So I don't think there was really much they could do, but it certainly was a little concerning to hear that there wasn't sort of any backup plan.
Yeah, it just starts back to the higher ups just being disorganized. Like about 2 weeks now, probably, like when the Big Ten announced they were coming back, like right away, their schedules, all the schools released their schedules right away, and they knew when they're playing, so they can aim towards that school and that date. Like with the Pac-12, it's just there's not a lot of direction, as you know, in the past few years, which has been the same case.
Yeah, well, why don't we stay on that topic of the college football playoffs? With the Pac-12 season being only 7 games compared to all of the other conferences, this could potentially screw up a lot of things for the Pac-12 if they want to be considered for the college football playoff. So, I mean, Ryan, what do you think about this? If a Pac-12 team were to go 7-0, how much of a consideration do you think they would be in for the college football playoffs?
I think it depends on who they play, but I do think they have a shot. But as we've seen in past years, even when they've been close and a team like Oregon, Utah, any of those schools, they've been close, in the championship game, they just don't get that nod because the overall talent with the Pac-12 teams just isn't on that higher level yet. And it's really going to hurt these teams like USC, Utah, and Oregon because, like you said earlier, if in the first 2-3 weeks, one of those teams misses a game, they're probably just cut out from the Pac-12 or from the college football playoffs.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I just don't think – I think it's too hard to make a case for an undefeated Pac-12 team to have a leg up on some of those other schools and some of the other conferences that are most likely going to be, have a one-loss team, right? I don't see – let's just say – Oregon ends up going 7-0, right? They go 7-0. They win the Pac-12 championship. Do you really see them having an upper hand over, a 9-1 LSU or a 9-1 Alabama, a 9-1 Georgia, even a 9-1 Florida? I don't, because I really don't think you can make the argument that 7 games was enough to really prove that you're one of the top 4 teams. Because, I mean, in my opinion, it's just not good enough to get into the playoffs because all those teams that I just mentioned play against each other, right? So one of those teams is gonna have a win over the other. So there's your significant win right there. Oregon, if they were to go 7-0, their only significant wins would be against Utah and USC, right? But even an 8-2 Florida team. I mean, if Florida goes 8-2 and their only losses are against LSU and Georgia, they've still beaten Texas A&M. They still beat Tennessee, and they still beat Kentucky. So those 3 wins are, in my opinion, far outweigh a win over Utah and a win over USC. So I don't know. I think the Pac-12 is just pretty screwed here. I don't see a scenario where a team goes 7-0 and they can sneak into the top 4.
Yeah, especially this year, I don't think it's the year for a Pac-12 team to make the playoffs. I mean, as you said, those schools, there's better competition, and than the voters, have favored those SEC schools in the past, and that's just how it's going to be. I mean, I just don't see a path for any of these Pac-12 schools right now.
And those were just the SEC SEC teams that I mentioned. We didn't even talk about the Big Ten. Like Penn State and Texas. Like they're going to be hanging around too. So I don't know. I mean, here's something else that I just thought of. I mean, what if Utah or USC was that team to go 7-0? Like, would they be more considered in the college football playoffs? Because then they would have a win. Their probably most significant win would be over Oregon. And if Utah were to go 7-0, they would probably have that significant win over Oregon. Is that win over Oregon enough to push them into the college football playoffs?
I mean, I think if USC, I think they would have a better shot to maybe get in just because of their they're just being an iconic team throughout the last 20 plus years. So I think they could have that. They could maybe get that edge. But as we saw last year, when you have both Pac-12, both Pac-12 teams at the end of that top 10 tier, it's hard for even if one of those teams wins, as you said, if you're not beating a top 4 to 5 team, it's hard to jump ahead and out-jump some of those teams,
Yeah, I think that one's a little bit closer for me, if they have that Oregon win. But like I said, I mean, if Florida ends up going 9-1, because I see Florida as kind of one of those bubble teams right now, they'll be hanging around, 6 to 10. So they'll be screwing things up a little bit for the Pac-12. If they were to go 9-1, they're going to have a win over Georgia or LSU. So that one of those wins right there is already good enough than what any of the Pac-12 teams can scrape together for a significant win. So I still don't think that's that significant a win over Utah, because a win over Georgia or a win over LSU is much more of that boost that's going to put you into the top 4.
Yeah, and in a normal season, even if a Pac-12 school would go undefeated, I think they would struggle. And it showed not undefeated, but they still have shown that it's very hard to make the playoffs. The way this playoff format is constructed, it doesn't favor any schools outside of that top 5 to 6 group of schools. It's just very hard for these teams to make an impact. And the bowl games just don't mean as much to these schools.
I mean, if only the if only the college football playoffs was 8 teams instead of 4. I mean, seriously, how much fun would that be? I mean, that was another thing that I was pretty surprised to hear about from the webinar yesterday. It was just, how passively Larry Scott answered a question. I think somebody from the media asked a question about whether or not the NCAA was considering an expansion. And Larry Scott basically said that there was no sort of push from the Pac-12 to the NCAA to expand the playoffs. That doesn't make any sense to me. Larry Scott basically said that there was no sort of push at all. I mean, that was just so puzzling to me. If there was any conference that should be leading the charge in those kinds of talks, and especially in a season, with these circumstances that we're in, even if it's only just for this season, an expanded playoffs would benefit the Pac-12 so tremendously, right? The Pac-12 should have been front and center, leading the charge in this whole thing. We need an expanded playoffs, because if the playoffs was 8 teams, your 7-0 Pac-12 team gets in no problem, no questions asked, right? They're gonna sneak in anywhere from the 6 to the 8 seeds. So
yeah, and in general, every year there's pretty much would be a Pac-12 team.
Yeah,
there's 8 teams. One of those Pac-12, whoever wins the championship, is obviously going to be ranked very high, and always is. They just always on that borderline.
Right. In an 8-team playoff, you can do it 2 different ways, right? You can do the top 8 teams, or you can just do, whoever wins the conference from each of the Power 5 schools. There's your 5 right there, and then 3 wildcard teams, right? That would guarantee a Pac-12 team in the college football playoffs every year. It was just so puzzling to me that it didn't sound like Larry Scott and the Pac-12 was pushing for this at all. They would be benefiting from this so much. I don't know. It just blew my mind that there didn't seem to be any sort of aggressive push for not only for the future college football playoffs, but for this year especially.
Yeah, it seems like he's on his way out. It sounds like from everything I'm hearing on Twitter and on the internet, he won't be with the Pac-12 that much longer, which will be good news for all Pac-12 fans, because obviously what you were just saying, he just doesn't obviously know how to push this conference in the right direction anymore.
Yeah, 100%. isn't that why we're doing this whole thing, like cramming all these games in, is so that we can get a team in the college football playoffs, right? Like I know the Pac-12 and Larry Scott wants a Pac-12 football team in its, in the college football playoffs, right? So like, why are we not making a more like an effort to expand the playoffs, just not for the future, but for this year in general? Like, and like you can even just make the argument that like under these circumstances, like an 8-team playoff would be needed. Or, like something that we talked about on last week's show, like I don't see the big deal at all in just pushing the college football players back a few weeks, right? Like why are we so hard set on this January 1st deadline? Like, does anybody really care if we play the Rose Bowl on January 1st as opposed to, January 7th or January 14th? Like, I don't know.
And the college football playoffs, they're always in domes, so like it doesn't even matter. Like, yeah, like I don't know why they're pushing. Like, I mean, I know why they want to have a smaller season to limit the amount of contact between different teams because of COVID-19. But like, yeah, I agree. Like, if anything, just have the college football playoffs in domes, and the rest of the bowl games that they can't fit in, like maybe on like East Coast places, they just put them all on the West Coast.
Yeah, I think that the only way a Pac-12 team could sneak into the college football playoffs is just if, the Pac-12 kind of fixes their schedules and gives those favorable teams good matchups, right? Because that's the main thing that's holding those Pac-12 teams back, apart from only playing 7 games. But it's just those significant wins, right? Like the Pac-12 competition in general, there's only like, 3 good teams, right? So those 3 good teams need to play each other. Like one of those teams needs to go 7-0, where 1 or 2 of those wins are against the top team. Like if Oregon goes 7-0, they're gonna have to play USC. They're gonna have to play Washington. They will play Washington since they're in the North, but they're gonna have to play Utah. Like those 2 games where the North is playing the South and the South is playing the North. It has to be those top teams playing against each other, and it's gonna look a little funky, right? It's gonna look like, oh, the Pac-12 is rigging the schedule. But that's what you have to do, right? Like you can't randomize the schedule because then Oregon goes 7-0, but their only significant win is against Utah in the Pac-12 championship, or it's only against USC in the Pac-12 championship. So like there has to be more of like their schedule needs to be fixed in a way that the 7 games can really prove that us playing those 7 games was enough to get into the college football playoffs.
Yeah, because the reality is like teams like Arizona, Colorado, like Oregon State, any of those bottom tier teams, like like Larry Scott's like, then the team they shouldn't be focusing on like making those teams a favorable schedule.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we expect the Arizona Wildcats to be anywhere near the college football playoff conversations. Not now, or not before, and especially not now, because it just seems like hits just keep on coming for Arizona. The Wildcats lost another player to the transfer portal this past week, and it wasn't just any old random player. It was another linebacker. So, like, if that position group couldn't get any thinner, right? Kylan Wilborn announced this past week that he is entering the transfer portal. Ryan, just kind of give me your thoughts on this. What do you think of Kylan Wilborn's decision to hit the transfer portal?
I mean, like I've said in the past, I mean, I don't blame his specific decision. I mean, if he can get a better opportunity somewhere else on a higher stage, I mean, props to him, and hopefully he does well. I mean, I still think this linebacking core has some young, talented players. Like, I'm looking at guys like Jalen Harris, Darian Clark. Like, these guys are versatile players that have played a lot of different positions. And, like, I think they have the best of both worlds with them, too, this year with, like, they could pair, like, the speed and, like, the power. And I think they'll be better than expected back there.
Yeah, going back to Kylan Wilborn transfer, I think the thing was really interesting to me was the timing of this whole thing, right? Like why hit the transfer portal now, right? Like this isn't one of those situations like Colin Schooler and Tony Fields where they announced it, weeks ago, right? Like it was the timing was just so weird for me because a lot of schools have already started their classes, and most of the Power 5 conferences have already playing games. I mean, sure, yeah. Big Ten hasn't started yet, and so maybe we can see him go there, or maybe he can jump ship to another Pac-12 team. But I don't know the ins and outs of like transfers and all that, but like I think aren't classes like mostly starting for like some of these guys? Like, how do you enroll like this late into a semester? Like, is there any way that he's going to be able to play like right away? Like, I have no idea how that's going to work. So,
and even play, like, let alone like, is he going to have like because like you don't want to just transfer somewhere to be on a roster. Like, is he going to be able to play like and have a lot of time and maybe start? Like that's probably his goal. But yeah, he doesn't have that many more years left. And I don't know. I don't know if this timing was right.
well, I mean, if he's going somewhere else to get playing time, like you're gonna get playing time in Arizona. Like Arizona has maybe like 6 linebackers on the roster right now. Like if I don't, there has to be something more to this where he had a better offer from somewhere and he already has something lined up. Like I don't know, just to kind of jump ship at this point just seems real interesting to me because like I know that the news came out Monday that he was leaving, and that was a few days after the Pac-12 had come together over the weekend and said that they were going to vote on the season. I think like once everyone heard the news that the Pac-12 was gonna, vote, I think we all assumed that the league was going to be coming back, right? So I don't think this is one of those situations where, he's jumping ship because he wants to play for a team and the Pac-12's not playing like Colin Schooler and like Tony Fields. Like I think that situation is not the same as Kylan Wilborn. So like I don't know. It was just this was a super weird one for me.
Yeah, it just doesn't look like, getting back to my feelings on Kevin Sumlin, it just doesn't look great on him when you just have like so many of your impact defensive players just keep transferring out. Like just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it is going to open up a lot of playing time for these younger players who will hopefully shine this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the players know a sinking ship when they see one, right? But I mean, so where does this leave this linebacker group now? I mean, I know you briefly mentioned some of the players, but this position group was already in shambles, right? So, I mean, now you have one more guy headed out. Like, what does this linebacker group look like right now?
It starts with Jalen Harris. I'm a big fan of him. He's gained 38 pounds since being a freshman. He played a little bit last year, but I think like if you can give him that big role and a lot of playing time, I think he can be that guy for the linebacking group. He's a very strong player. As I said, put on a lot of weight, and I think he's versatile. He can play in a lot of different areas on the defense.
I think it's certainly going to be a major issue for Paul Rhodes and his defensive group. I mean, because we already know that Paul Rhodes wants to install that new 3-4 defensive scheme, and in a 3-4 scheme, you want to have. I mean, ideally, you want to have at least 8 linebackers that you can rotate through on a 3-4. But I mean, there's no way Arizona has that many like on the roster right now. So I mean, maybe we see a last-minute defensive scheme change, or I don't know. But I do certainly think this is a huge deal for Arizona. I mean, it's certainly too late to pick up a transfer from somewhere else at this point. I mean, maybe we can hit up BJ Foster and see what he's up to. I mean, I don't know if you saw that drama with him a few weeks ago at Texas where he walked out in the middle of the game. But he's a 5-star linebacker. Like maybe hit him up, see what he's up to if he wants to play for Arizona. But like I don't know. I mean, I think at this point it's just too late for a transfer. It's going to be kind of just whatever the team has now, and it's going to be a lot of plug and play. I mean, who do you think? Because there's obviously not enough linebackers right now on this position group to be shuffling through thoroughly, right? So, like, do you see anyone that can maybe make that move to like make that transition to linebacker?
I don't know about that. No one comes to really mind, but a young player that I do think I really like is Coemba Watson, if I'm saying that correctly. I think he's the real deal. He has his breakaway speed, and he's a game changer. And I think I think he could be an impact player this year if given an opportunity.
Yeah, I think if Jabbar Triplett is healthy enough for this season, I don't think he will be. He tore his ACL or his Achilles back in, I think, March or April. I probably should have fact-checked that, but it was earlier in the year, so that's usually like a 12-month process to kind of, get back into it. I don't really see him being healthy for the upcoming season, but I mean, I'm still holding out for my boy Eddie Sayamahu. Like, please, Arizona, put him at middle linebacker. Like, he would make such a good linebacker. Like he played safety in high school. He's 6'3", like 250 pounds. Like, he fits that build of a middle linebacker so well. Like, I don't know why the official roster has him listed at defensive end. Like, at this point, I'm just praying that they put Sayamahu at middle linebacker, because I think he can be a legit linebacker. And like, that's really the only person I can maybe see making that transition, because you can't move Jarius Wallace or Christian Young down to that spot, because they don't have enough safeties either to have that kind of depth to do that. So like, I don't know, maybe Jalen John could play some middle linebacker. He's like 220 pounds. I don't know if he has any experience playing linebacker, but I don't know. I think Arizona's pretty screwed here. I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting to see kind of how the roster shakes out. And once we start to see camp starting to ramp up a little bit, then we'll start to kind of see how the depth chart will form. So I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, I am too. And I think they could change up the defensive scheme a little bit. Like, I think they're going to just use like everyone, like, and they're just going to try to, like switch people in and out and see like who works. I mean, maybe play some of the safeties, move them up. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, all these guys, like, just looking at like the linebackers they have, and not to be a lot of them are very young and just inexperienced. So it's going to be, I mean, I don't expect much from the defense. The defense, even last season, wasn't that great. They gave up a ton of points almost every game. So my expectations aren't high.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a lot of freshmen playing at that linebacker group. I mean, I don't think there's any viable way you can run a 3-4 at this point with the kind of depth that it has. Maybe they're going to have to switch the scheme up or something, but I don't know. I really don't know. So, I mean, that's our show. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Reminder that we are here every Friday at 4 p.m., so make sure you tune in every week for that. And we also have columns now as part of our collaboration with sportspac12.com. You can check that out at sportspac12.com, where our boy Ryan Wall is writing columns for them. He just released his first column a few days ago. So make sure you check that out on their website, and also visit our website as well, because we post all of our clips and our full shows to www.dashsports.tv. You can also follow us on all of our social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we hope to see you guys next week.